All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever in the world you're joining us from. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar, 8 Tips for Advanced Course Authoring in Open edX. We are so excited to have you all with us today. It looks like we've got quite a few folks on the line. We've got a lot of content to cover today with our speakers, Cody and Matthew. I'll introduce them shortly. But before we get started, as you all probably noticed, the audio is muted. However, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you look around in the webinar, you'll see that there are a couple of widgets. You can use a chat widget anytime to just chat with us and ask questions or make comments. Or you can use a Q&A widget, and we'll make sure to cover your questions either during the webinar, or if it's a longer question, we can cover it afterwards. But feel free to ask questions and interact as much as possible. We've got a couple of polls lined up as well, so we definitely want to see some responses from you there. And yes, I just hit the record button. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared immediately within an hour or two after the webinar. Just a quick bit about AppSembler. AppSembler is a fully distributed team. Some of the folks on this call are actually customers, so thank you for joining us. AppSembler lets you easily deliver hands-on immersive training experiences to your customers, employees, and users. Here are some of the organizations that we are proud to work with. We work with large enterprise organizations to nonprofits, universities, but here's just a small group of them. And I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass it off to Matthew and Cody to briefly introduce themselves. Matthew?
Thanks, Lisa. Hey guys, I'm Matthew Harrington. I'm one of the customer success managers here at AppSembler. I've got about 4 or 5 years of experience using the platform now, so I like to think I kind of know my way around at this point. Cody?
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Caesar. Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Carson. I'm another one of the customer success managers here at AppSembler. I've been with the company for over 4 years now, getting close to 5, and I don't think I have quite as much authoring experience as Matthew does, who has used the platform outside of this context. But yeah, been around the block a little bit myself too. So hopefully you can trust that the information you're about to receive is well thought out and well experienced. Caesar, if you want to hop over to the next slide, I'm going to give a quick overview of the 8 things that we're going to be talking about today. Kind of a varying degree here of advancedness in terms of the subjects we're covering. We're going to talk about context and naming and how just basically some kind of more basic but less often used tools of course authoring, grading and how that figures into your overall course scheme, the different enrollment practices that are available to you, a couple of specific tools that are available, the open response assessments tool and the peer instruction XBlock. Both are really, really valuable and I think worth diving into in their own right. Then we're going to talk a little bit about content variety, mixing things up to keep learners engaged. Matthew's going to touch a bit on HTML and CSS and some external tools. And then finally, we're gonna bring it all back home, talking about template courses and staff-only areas, which are just some good best practices for if you're doing a lot of authoring and making a lot of courses. So I think I'm going to take over control of sharing my screen. Thank you, Caesar. And we're gonna dive right in. I'm gonna start us off, and we're gonna do this by using an Open edX course. And so this is Open edX Studio for those of you who are unfamiliar.
Actually, Cody, do you mind if we do a quick poll?
Oh yeah, good call. Thank you, Caesar, for stopping me before I get going too long. Yeah, Caesar, launch that poll, man.
Awesome. So everybody, I'm just going to take a few seconds here. Our first poll of the webinar. You should all see a question there with a couple of responses. I'll just read it out loud. How advanced do you consider your course authoring techniques? Your options are: I've never authored a course, I stick to videos and problem sets, I try to branch out and use a variety of tools, or I am a master. My courses could win awards if they had that sort of thing. I think they do have that sort of thing. Do they?
I don't know. That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Pretty sure they do.
Maybe people like me shouldn't put such silly options in polls without being aware of that.
Tip number 1. It's a free tip.
Yeah.
We've got 75% of folks have voted. Going to give it another 5 seconds and then close the poll. All right, I'm going to end the poll and let's share these results. Do you guys see these results?
I like it. Okay. We got a couple more newbies than I thought we might have. That's good. You're gonna start off in a good way. Nobody claims to be a master. I'm shocked. I know some of you on this call. You really are. I know some of you on this call. You're some of my favorite people, and I know that you are masters. That's good to know, though. This is good. Okay. Well, in that case,
take it away.
Yeah, I think this content is going to be perfectly suited for the audience here. That's always the hope, at least. So I'm going to dive right in. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about here is context and naming. And I've created a couple of units here to kind of go over this. So when we're building a course, one of the things we want to think about is the context of all of our course materials. This is kind of a more basic idea, but you would be surprised at how often people kind of will forget or choose not to do this kind of thing. And my working theory is that sometimes Open edX is just too easy. You can just easily just drop in any kind of component you want. Look at that. I just made a video. It took me less than 3 seconds to put that in there. And so you can kind of get into the habit of just, you add a problem, you add a video, you add a problem, and you're just going and going and going without pausing for a second to think about how the learner is viewing everything and what they're seeing. And so one of the things we like to urge is to make sure you add a little context around what it is that you're delivering. Here are a couple of main points why. If something can be misinterpreted on the internet, it will be. We've seen this, this is a tale as old as time. This greater understanding for what the content that a learner is absorbing will, lead to greater completion and progress through the course. A really good example is a lot of times courses that will have a wrap-up section, something at the end where, you maybe ask for feedback on how was this course? Did you like the content? How was it delivered? And sometimes people will just drop that survey in there without any sort of context around why it's important to you as an organization or what the learner is supposed to take away from the course in a broader type of way. And it's kind of shocking to see, how big of a leap the numbers and completion on those surveys can take if all you do is add a little bit of text around what it is that you're asking and what the learner can do next now that they've completed the course. I'm going to give a quick example of this is a unit in Open edX that doesn't have any content, or context rather. It's got content but no context, and we can even view this in the LMS. I'm going to hop over. This is exactly what students would see if they were working through this course. They would come to this page and they'd see a video, and then they'd see a question about this video. Most people aren't, completely incompetent, and they would understand that you're supposed to watch the video and then answer the question. But all you have to do is just add a little bit of text. This is the same unit, just with a little bit of important, what it looks like to add a little bit of text and put everything that the learner is consuming into a larger context of the course itself. So literally all this is just a little bit of text before, and then underneath the question, all you have to do is, add a little bit more information about what they should have, gleaned from this particular video. Back over in Studio, if I hop down to this little unit here, you can easily see kind of exactly how this looks. And it's really, really simple. This is just an HTML text unit, and under here, under the checkbox question, all I've done is I've added a little bit more info about what these follow-up questions are going to look like. For those of us that haven't created a course before, creating a text unit is just as simple as hitting HTML text, and then you've got an empty unit, and you can come in here and you can add whatever context you like. I'm going to delete that really quickly because we don't need it. And then I'm going to hop over to the next section, or I should be careful. We should use the proper words. The next subsection, which deals a little bit with naming. And naming is something that's really important in Open edX, and it's not just for course structure here. We're not just talking about naming your sections and naming your subsections. We're talking about naming your components specifically. And what I mean by that is you can see here that this component has a specific name, which is why name components. And if I create a video, this video hasn't been named because it's brand new and it just says video there. And there are three major reasons why it's important to make sure you're naming those things. The first part is that in a lot of cases, it's visible to the students. They can see that in the LMS. If I look back over here, we can see the text doesn't necessarily show it, but the video does. And if you're a learner and you're going through this course and you just see this thing that says video, I mean, yes, obviously I see that there's a video here. So why didn't you give me more information? And down here, if I see checkboxes, it's not useful information to me. It's just kind of clunky and in the way and it doesn't look good to the student. The second part is that it's incredibly important to the navigation of the mobile app. If you're using the Open edX mobile app and you're going through your courses that way, every single component name is visible, even the text components, and it's basically how the course is navigated. And so you want to make sure that each of these components has a meaningful name to it. And the last and most, I don't know about most important, but another important point is that it allows those components to be searchable. So anything if it's just named checkboxes, for example, and I'm looking for, the first follow-up question or, the intro question or something like that, it's not going to show up because this just says text box or checkboxes. But if I go back over here, I'm going to go back to my subsection about context and add a couple names in there. It's really, really easy to do. All you have to do is click edit, and then under this settings section here, that's where you're going to find your display name, and that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to call this the welcome message, hit save, and then I'm going to call this video, this one just shows up right there, the introduction video, hit save. And this is like an extra step, right? This is something that a lot of times people will just decide not to do because it takes a couple extra clicks. I'm gonna call this intro follow up and hit save. But for those reasons I mentioned, it really can take a course from being just a passable course to being a really engaging course that learners are gonna have a much better experience with. So now I'm refreshing the student side. Oh, I didn't publish my changes. Always publish your changes if you are ready to. And now once we refresh, we'll see that these names should be showing up properly. Huh. Oh, that's my without context section. There it is. Okay, cool. So now we see introduction video. Okay, so now I know what this is. And then beneath that, trying to scroll. Here we go. We'll see we've got intro follow-up. So that's a little thing, but it's something that a lot of people overlook, and it really can take your course from being good to great or even better. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to touch on, and you guys, I'm not watching the chat actively. I'm trusting my colleagues here to be able to answer any questions you guys have, but feel free to keep shooting those out. The next thing I'm going to touch on is grading. Okay, so grading is something that you really, really need to think about when you're authoring your course. Is it right for your use case? And a lot of the times you may not think it is when it really has effects outside of just standard, give my student an A or a B or whatever. So there are two big things to think about with grading. The first is that it's required for course completion and therefore certificate generation. So if you're wanting to track if you're wanting to track your learners, whether or not they're completing your course, grading is the key component of that. And similarly, it's required just to track progress through a course. And so OpenEdX doesn't have necessarily a mechanism to just go in and look and see where the learners are progressing as they go throughout the course, other than via the grading policy. And a slightly smaller thing, lest we forget, grading is also just important for your learners to see how they're doing, and for them to their own edification in that. Just make sure you're considering these things in whether or not they're important to your course. I have a little example of a question here. So should you think about grading as you're authoring your course? And the answer, of course, is yes, it is important. So the next thing I'm going to jump into is a quick example of how this is all set up. Bear with me for 1 second. The first thing is setting up the grading policy, and this is just going to show me a little demo, remind me to demo this, and so I'm just going to jump right into it. So to set up your grading policy in OpenEdX, a lot of you guys may know this already, but if you don't, it's under the Settings drop-down menu and the Grading submenu there. So we're going to click on it, and we're going to hop into this section. And so the overall grade range is the first thing that you see, and it's not necessarily obvious, but this is a click and drag type of interface. And so you can decide how low or high you want your pass or fail grades to be. If you want just more than just pass or fail, you can click this plus button and you can add levels to your grade. In this situation, anything above an F is a pass. And so you can kind of adjust this to however you want. I'm going to go ahead and remove these. Most commonly, I feel like we see pass fail as the most used grading format, but you're obviously free to set it up however you want. So the next important thing is the assignment types, and OpenEdX starts you off by giving you all of these different assignment types. It's basically, there's 26 total assignments throughout your course. And what I often do when I'm working with this is I just delete these from the very beginning, and I prefer to start from scratch on my own. And so because most of my courses, I usually just have one assignment type, because I'm not doing big exams. I just want to be able to make sure that my students are, getting checked along the way. And so I'm just going to call this a knowledge check. And I'm going to not type it like a crazy person, and I'm going to abbreviate it KC. And I'm going to say there's 10 of these throughout my entire course. And then I'm going to make sure that they make up 100% of the total grade. And so that's my grading policy. You've got to get at least half of these knowledge checks right in order to pass. And so I'm going to click Save. And now my changes have been saved. And so I'm going to go back to my course outline. And so now what we have to do is we have to make sure that OpenEdX knows which content is graded and which content is not. And the way you do that is on the subsection level. And so I'm going to come in here, and on this little gear for this subsection, you'll see this Grade As button, and I'm going to choose Knowledge Check. And so this now signifies that whenever someone answers that question that's in there, I'm bringing this back, about whether or not you should consider your grading policy, that is now a graded question. And so because I answer that yes, I'm 10% of the way, because there's going to be 10 total, to my grade. And so what we want to do is we want to then go through, and anywhere we know we have questions that are going to be a part of our grading policy, we're going to want to go ahead and change those to make sure that OpenEdX knows that, hey, there's content in here that is graded. And so, but one of the things I want to touch on are some best practices for grading. So one of the first things I want to mention is that it's good to spread your knowledge checks out. Or whatever problem sets they may be called. As I just mentioned, grading is set on the subsection level. And so a good reason to spread this out is so that way you can make sure that at equal intervals, you're seeing how your students are doing. And it gives you a really good sort of overview of the progress that they're making. I keep mentioning this word progress. I'm going to hop over to the LMS for one quick second, just to give you an example. Here under the progress bar, every student has this tab available to them. They're able to come in here and see how they're doing across the course. So these are all my knowledge checks. I've got 10 of them total, and then I've got an average in my total grade. I haven't answered any questions necessarily in the LMS yet, and so it's not going to be reporting anything. But in order to have this be a meaningful representation of my progress throughout the entire course, we're going to want to, make sure that we spread those knowledge checks out. And if we're an instructor in this course, which most of us here are, we're going to want to be able to check that on our specific students as well. And we can do that via the grade book. And if we do this and our knowledge checks are spread evenly out, we'll be able to see as we go through this course, oh, it looks like people are falling off at around, and knowledge check number 8 or whatever it is. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. Make sure those are spread out throughout your course. The second thing that we like to mention is not everything needs to be graded. I've just spent an entire time talking about graded content and the importance of it and all. But it's sometimes good to take the pressure off your learners and have a few questions that are ungraded that they can answer, just to make sure that they're grasping the concepts that you're trying to teach them. It keeps the courses interactive in a good way without making every little question be a super meaningful part of what they're doing. Okay.
Actually, Cody, before we move on to the next one,
yeah,
we've got a few questions here from Andrew.
Yeah,
maybe
please.
It's a combination of you and Matthew. You can address them. So nice. Take that drink, Cody. So
mute next time.
So Andrew asks, can Cody discuss how ungraded tests affect progress tracking, and can they be used to track progress like graded? And also, can questions, test quizzes, finals, can they be weighted? For example, I want the final to be 50% of the final grade.
For sure.
Those are a couple of questions. I'll let you both tag team or however you want to address them.
Yeah, those are good questions, Andrew. Thank you for asking those. The first and most important thing I think to touch on is that ungraded assignments and problems are not going to be seen by the progress page by either you or the students. That's why when I mentioned in the first little bit there about whether or not it's right for you, considering that is going to be really important. Now, what you can do, and this will play into your next question, is you can set up your assignment types such that a few of them are worth, very, very little. For example, maybe I've got 10 of these throughout the course and I want them to be only worth 10% of the whole thing. So they're virtually ungraded, because then I'm going to add another assignment type and I'm going to call this my final exam. And we'll do this, we can do this like a college course, where the final exam is worth 90% of the entire grade. So this is where the weighting comes in. So now, whichever subsection I choose to be my final exam, and I put a whole bunch of problems in there, how the sum of those questions are answered is going to be worth 90% of my total grade, whereas each of these knowledge checks throughout the course cumulatively will only be worth 10% of the total grade. So really, like, if each of these, if there's 10 of them total, each of those knowledge checks is only worth 1% of the whole grade. And if, maybe it only takes a 85 or 80 or whatever it is to pass the course, you can essentially fail all those knowledge checks. And if you still get an A on your final exam, you'll be fine. And this will allow you to kind of look at, this will allow that to come through on the progress side of things as well. I hope that answers your question. So no, ungraded content is not going to be seen in the progress side of things, but you can weight them incredibly low. If you wanted to, I think you could put this down all the way to 1, for example. You just have to make sure that the weight of the total grade of all your assignment types add up to 100%. Great question. Yeah, super important.
We've got a follow-up question here from Judith real quick. She asks, where do students see the weighting?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a question that I don't really know the answer to.
Can I jump in on that one, Cody?
Yeah, hit it, Matthew.
So there's no kind of automated place that I know of that weighting is displayed, but it's definitely something you should fill students in on. So I'd very much kind of recommend just having a bit at the start of your course saying, here's how you're going to be assessed. Here's how you pass this course. Because that's information they want to know, right? Like if they're coming to start a course, they want to know how they're going to succeed at the course. So it's a good idea to just be upfront to them and say, like, look, you're going to have these exams, they're going to be worth this much. You're going to have a final exam, which is worth this much.
Yeah.
So just putting it into your course content is fine.
Yeah. Exactly. That plays right back into the context. Like, you kind of have to assume your students are kind of, they know nothing, and they don't see any of this stuff. And that's why it's also good to have beta testers and like test things out from the LMS side to see exactly what they see. But really, the more you can spell a lot of this out for your students, the better, and the more engaged they're going to be throughout. So that's always our recommendation. I'm going to move on. We can talk about this more later if we have time, but I'm looking at the clock right now and we're already a little bit behind schedule. And so I'm going to breeze through these maybe a little quickly, but hopefully we'll be able to, get through all this stuff. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is enrollment and the various practices around it. So there are basically two main types of enrollment. There's self-enrollment and there's staff enrollment. Self-enrollment works really simply. Users click enroll on your course about page. Every course has a course about page. It's just your course URL/about. This is an example of what it looks like. It's got it's pre-populated with a bunch of filler content you'd make sure you want to change. We're not going to touch on how to do that here. You can find that out. But essentially, if your course is self-enrollment, your learners will come here. They'll see a button that says, instead of view course, it will say, click here to enroll in this course. And that's that. Easy, simple. Obviously, the trade-off there is that you have limited control over the access to that course. Self-enrollment, or staff enrollment, excuse me, is where a course staff will explicitly enroll the users that they want in the instructor dashboard. And so I'm going to hop over again to the LMS, and here is the instructor dashboard for this specific course. And under this membership tab, you've got this batch enrollment page here. And so if I want to invite someone to enroll in this course, all I have to do is type their email address and click enroll. And there we go, I've enrolled Caesar. The cool thing about this too is that it works with CSVs. And so if you've got a whole bunch of email addresses that you want to enroll at once, you can just copy them from Excel or wherever and paste them right in there and then hit enroll. And so that's a good way to make sure you have total control over that. Now, to make sure that people aren't self-enrolling while you're preferring to have staff enrollment be the only option, I'm going to delete these so I don't accidentally break something, you're going to want to set your course to be set up as by invitation only. And the way you do that is you go into advanced settings in Open edX Studio, and through all of these various things, if you Command F, you can find invitation only. And by default, this is set to false. So that's important to know. By default, anyone can enroll in your course. But if you just change this to true and you click save, all of a sudden, even if your course is visible, if I were not logged in or enrolled, this would just say enrollment by this course is by invitation only. So that way nobody's going to get in. Unless you invite them via the instructor dashboard here. There's another, if you want to kind of have the best of both worlds, maybe if you could consider that, you can keep your course to open enrollment. So you can change that invitation only back to false. So it's still open enrollment. And then there's another item in here that controls the visibility of your course in your catalog. So right now it's set to both. And what both means is that it has a visible about page, which we see right here. And if I'm in the course catalog, we can see that it's right here. This 8 ways to supercharge your Open edX course. If we want to change this to just about, we'll click save. I'm going to make sure I copy this. We can still see that this course has an about page that's accessible. And you can send this out to your learners in order for, or a closed type of network for people to be able to enroll themselves without you having to do it specifically. But it's not going to be seen in your course catalog. It's gone. So that way, people just browsing won't find it unless someone has passed them the link to that about page. Okay, so that's enrollment. Those are the two kind of main ways that they work. One thing I want to touch on is using third-party communications tools. This is something that a lot of folks like to use if they don't enjoy the stock emails that come from Open edX. So what I'm talking about here is back in this batch enrollment section. You'll notice that there's this little notify users by email tick box. And so what happens is that's ticked by default. And if you type an email address here to enroll a student, like I did with Caesar, they will get an email from OpenEdX. It's a plain text email. It's very simple and bare bones. And a lot of people would much rather have their emails be branded, have greater control over everything there. And so what they'll do is you can paste in all of your email addresses here that you're going to want to use. So, if I'm using all of these dummy emails, and I can just untick this button that says notify users by email, I can click enroll. They'll all be enrolled, but they won't know anything in their email inbox. And then you can use a third-party tool, for example, something like MailChimp, just to craft your own email entirely. It's a little bit of an extra step, but obviously with something like this that's built for sending emails, you have a little bit more control. You can add a nice image here. You can do some headings. You can add whatever content you want, and a call to action button as opposed to just plain text. You could even add a GIF of Tom Hanks if you wanted to. I hope we don't owe any movie studios money after that.
Cody, just a heads up, time check.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. So we're gonna speed through this really quickly. So that's enrollment. There's a lot of options. There's two main things, but there's a lot of ways to kind of toy with it and make it your own. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to touch on before I pass it off to Matthew is the open response assessment. And this is a specific type of course tool that you can use in order to ask questions of your students that are a little bit more in depth, that require a little bit more thought out type of responses. So the open response assessment, or ORA for short, or peer assessment, it's got several names. That's exactly what it's used for. It's a tool for letting learners write out answers to essay style questions. It's cool because some questions require more nuanced answers, and then you can have more subjective grading schemes. And it's also one of the only places where it's relatively simple for your learners to just upload a small file as a part of their answer. Small meaning up to 10 megabytes. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the student experience is. So if a student comes to an open response assessment or ORA, they're going to see, the first thing they're going to see is the prompt and the question. And so the prompt for this question, for this ORA, is what kind of bear is best. And so if I'm answering this question, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type gummy bears. And if I wanted to, I could upload a file here, but I'm not going to waste time doing that. And so I'm going to go ahead and click submit and say that I'm done. If this were something real, I'd want to, write out a little bit more of a nuanced argument. The next step, and this is why it's called the peer assessment XBlock, is you can choose to have your students assess each other's answers. And so, for example, my colleague Matthew has already answered this question, and he said there are basically two schools of thought. Some would say black bear, others grizzly. The latter are wrong. It is clearly the black bear. And this is, he uploaded a file, so we can all see exactly what he's talking about here. And now, since I'm a student assessing him, I'm going to give an example. I'm gonna grade him based on the criteria that I've set up. I'm gonna say that's a fair answer. And if I wanted to, in my comments, I'm gonna say fair answer. And then I'm gonna maybe grade him on the content of his actual of his argument. I'm gonna say he did make an excellent argument. And then if I want to, I can add some feedback here at the bottom, like good response. And so I'm gonna click submit my assessment and move to the next step. And now the next step is for a staff to grade my assignment. And so basically what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to come back later once a member of the course staff has graded my assignment using that same criteria in order to see my final grade. I'm not going to walk through all of that just because it does take a little bit of time. Suffice it to say that when we're in Studio, if we want to set up our own open response assessment, it's fairly simple. Because OpenEdX, like it often does, will walk you through the process step by step. And so if we go click on this problem button, it's one of our advanced problems. This is advanced course authoring after all. And we're gonna scroll down here and we're gonna see peer assessment. Why it's called peer assessment there and open response assessment here, don't ask, I'm not sure, I didn't make it. But once we have it instantiated here on Studio, all we have to do is click edit and then walk through these various steps. So the first thing we have to do is we have to write our own prompt. And so we're gonna say, which bear is best? And then we're going to say, okay, that's our question. And if we want to, we can add another prompt and have someone answer kind of 2 questions at once in this. And then the next thing we're going to do, and a lot of folks, if you're not looking for this, it's not like really obvious. You're going to see your rubric up here. And your rubric is, how this question is going to be graded. And it's graded based on criteria and options that, are a part of that criteria. So the first criterion that's here is the ideas, and determine if there's a unifying theme or main idea. So this is just content that's given to you for you to basically go in and replace. And you can type anything you want in this criteria to make it your own. And so then, as you saw me answer earlier, we had several options for how we answered, whether or not the response met this criteria. And so you can essentially change these however you want. You can name them whatever you want. You can add several of them. You can change the weight for each, for how much each is worth. And then if you want to, you can add required, optional, or no feedback for each given piece of criteria. And then the process repeats itself. And so you basically will go through and you can add you can add as much criteria as you want for how these questions are answered, and as many options per criteria as you want as well. And then finally at the end, there's an optional feedback section that I believe is just there. I'm not sure if that can be removed or not. If you want your open response assessment to have a file uploaded with it, you can essentially come in here and choose that under the settings section: image file, PDF or image file, or custom file types. And here is where you would basically say, you would specify which file types you would like to be allowed with these responses. So then one thing that's the most important, I almost forgot, is there are several steps involved with the ORA, as you saw me go through. And this is where you decide which steps are important and which aren't. The first one that's kind of on by default that I really am not a big fan of is the learner training. And I know I just went on the soapbox earlier about context, but this feels like it's a little too much to me, because what this does is it's basically just allows your learners to kind of walk through the process of grading a dummy response, which sometimes is just unnecessary. So I usually turn that off. There's the peer assessment, and you can specify how many assessments each learner must make. And then you can have a self-assessment step, which I also tend to find unnecessary. And then finally, staff assessment is off by default, but in a more traditional setting, that can be the most important one. And so if you want to, you can turn that on just by clicking that tick box. And then you hit save. And it's pretty much as easy as that. Obviously, you'd want to have people kind of test this as they go through it. But that's the open response assessment. Lots of versatility, lots of different ways you can go with it. And because I am taking too much of your time and you've got some more tips to get to, I'm going to pass the mic off to my colleague, Matthew, once I can stop sharing here.
Cool.
Thanks, Cody.
Thank you, Cody.
Yeah.
So I'm going to fly through my bit because Cody's eating all my time. And I think we should all be involved with him. But for those of you I've been talking to in the chat, I'm obviously going to stop doing that now, but hopefully Cody will jump in and help you with any other questions that you got.
I'm on it.
So, have we got my screen shown? We good?
Yes.
Awesome. So, those of you that have been using the platform for a while, particularly those who have talked to me, will know that I'm a big fan of XBlocks. These are ways of adding extra custom components to edX. And my favorite one of these is the peer instruction XBlock. What? This used to be referred to as UBCPI, the University of British Columbia Peer Instruction XBlock, which is obviously a bit of a mouthful. I'll show you what it does in a sec, but first let's look at enabling it quickly. It's in Settings, Advanced. And essentially to enable XBlocks, you just have to put in all their little short names. We've got a list of all the ones that are available on Tahoe, our primary edX product. But if you're not with us, you should be. We're great. But also you'll just be able to ask which XBlocks are installed on your instance with whoever manages it. So if I just enable UBCPI, this one is actually enabled by default, so unless you've deliberately removed it, you should have it on your site. So once I've saved that, I just go into my page. My laptop will let me. There we go. And all of a sudden, you remember we had those blocks earlier. We've now got this advanced one, which is where XBlocks show up. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because I've got more fun things to show you. But here's UBCPI. So the basic idea is many of you who may have been to university may be familiar with the traditional way that this is done, where a lecturer stands up, they'll talk about whatever they're talking about, and then they'll ask a question, and you might have a clicker. And then you might break into discussion groups to discuss what you've just voted on. This is kind of a very similar deal. So you ask a question, people vote for their options. I'm going to say water, despite the fact I know that's wrong. I give my rationale, which is kind of the discussion part of this. So I'm going to say because water is wet. We go through the steps. Then I see some other student answers, as well as some that have been kind of preceded. So you can sneak some people in there so that the first few people to access it have something to look at. You see a selection of answers, just kind of randomly picked from people who picked the same, who have answered the question previously. And then you get a chance to revise your answer. I'll go, ooh, yeah, you know what, air, I like air. Air is good, I like air. Then you get shown the correct answer. In future versions as well, the one we're upgrading to, there is actually an option to have no correct answer, so you can ask kind of more ambiguous questions. But you can see what the instructor decided to answer. And then when there's enough answers, you get some very cool charts. So you can see kind of how people answered before, how people answered after. The XBlock itself is super well made, so shout outs to the people that made it at the University of British Columbia. It's kind of, each field is fully labeled up with what goes in where. So I'm not going to spend hours going through this, just going to move on. Check it out, UBCPI. The next thing on my list is content variety. So we're going back a bit to a more, let's say, a more theoretical side of things here. A lot of people, when they make courses, end up like this. So if I just view this in live, there's a lot of courses where this is the course experience. And you see it a lot when you're working with people making open edX courses all day. They've got a video, and then here's another video. If my laptop doesn't freeze. Uh-oh. No, laptop, please, come back. Sorry, I've been having some trouble today. It's a video followed by another video, and another video, and another video. And wow, my machine is not playing ball today. I'm not throwing shade on courses that are just non-stop playlists, but what you've got is a playlist, it's not a course. There's been all sorts of smarter people than I who have done research into this. By mixing it up, you engage different parts of the brain. You engage people who learn in different ways. You just basically make life more interesting. So don't just pile in the same thing over and over and over again, because while it may work the first time, it's not going to work the 50th time. People are just going to tune out. So you want to mix it up. Have a video and then accompany it with some text. Like put in a problem. Let's say I have a multiple choice thing to make people wake up and actually engage with something. There's nothing I hate more than opening a course and seeing the same thing over and over again. I'm not just saying videos, I'm saying text. Like if your course is just text, 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 text. If your course has got fun interactives in it, that's also bad. If you're just doing that same fun interactive thing over and over again, people switch off, they disengage, they miss stuff, they get bored. What's fun the first time is not fun the 50th time, like I say. Just repeating myself over and over again to show you how boring it is. But there's a very specific quote that I've heard that I absolutely love, and that is, repetition is the enemy of novelty, which I get is the opposite, but novelty is when you're presented with something, it's fun, it's different. Repetition, you've already tuned out. I can feel it. It's really boring, right? So mix it up. To help you mix it up, I'm going to talk a bit now about HTML, CSS, and external tools. Before I dive into this too much, because it can get into a massive rabbit hole, I'm going to ask Caesar to hit me up with a poll, please. If you would be
Poll
so
coming
kind.
right up. Let's see. Poll number 2.
Probably.
Here it is.
Yeah. So how familiar are you with CSS and HTML? Have you never heard of CSS and HTML? Have you heard of them but never used them? Do you dabble a little bit? You know, you floated a thing. Are you a master, to put me to shame, or are you other? Which I have no idea what other would be.
I
If you
threw
pick
in other.
please let us know what other is if you voted.
All right, we've got more than half of folks submitted. I'll give you all another 5 seconds and then end the poll.
3, 2, 1.
Okay. Ending the poll and sharing the results.
Okay, we've got some dabblers in here.
Lots of dabblers.
I'm glad that everyone's heard of them because I really don't want to explain what HTML and CSS are. That's cool. So
right, I'm going to stop sharing.
These are common web languages, as you know. They let you inject a little bit of custom stuff into your courses. What this means is actually, while you don't have to be a kind of a web expert to use OpenEdX, what you can get out of your courses in OpenEdX is augmented by those skills. And it does mean as well that if you have like cool web designers or other web people that you know, hit them up. Get them to give you advice on page layouts, because essentially what you're doing when you're working in OpenEdX is you're offering web pages. Like, they may be in the structure of a course, they may have learning outcomes, they may have all sorts of other stuff, but you're offering web pages. So web designers can add value to a course. Sure what I mean by this? And the other thing is they can give you templates to work with. So show what I mean with this. Here's some I prepared earlier. So a few Brits on the call. I know that you're out there. It's Blue Peter. Yeah. There's no sticky back plastic involved, but kind of here's some very basic things that I've done with HTML and CSS on this page that I've turned into templates. So you can see on this page, I've removed the unit title that's always there. I've replaced it with my own fancy banner, which is actual text rather than actually being part of the banner. You can work with these to just basically give yourselves infinite amounts of templates and ways of presentation. So I can change this however I want. Without having to kind of make a new banner image if I was working with a banner image. You can have things like font awesome icons. I've written a very long article on our knowledge base about including font awesome icons. I recommend checking it out if you're interested. But instead of bullet points, I've got little tick boxes, because just why not make it nicer? You can have CSS animations flying around your course content if you wanted to. You can float your images left and right. You can do whatever you want with your page. In the future as well, we're very near to announcing and releasing our site-wide CSS widget for Tahoe, CSS editor, I should say. So you'll be able to put all these styles instead of inline on your site in general and then reference them how you want. That's very exciting. So I'm just going to stop trying to use the LMS on my laptop. It's just, everything is being silly today.
Hey Matthew, Gregory has a question. Is the banner image generated from the HTML script, or is it imported?
That banner image is just an image I've got in my files and uploads, and I've styled it to look like a banner. So it's in a div. It's the background of a div right now, if that helps at all.
Great, thanks, Matthew.
Other uses of this are things like signposts. So as Cody was saying earlier, context is useful. In this case, I've just put together a really basic signpost thing. You'll have to excuse my lack of ability to style things nicely because I'm not a designer. But I've just kind of put a big thing saying, here's a discussion, here's what you're going to discuss in it. And I've signposted it with just like this big icon. I've put it in a box, made it look slightly prettier, just to kind of help it stand out from the rest of my text. That's just pure CSS stuff. So you can have those signposts throughout your content saying, now it's time to do a discussion. So when you see this icon, you know it's discussion time. That kind of contextualization, again, very, very important, as Cody was saying earlier. Excuse me. The last thing you can do with HTML that I think is the most important thing to grasp, regardless of all this fancy CSS stuff, making stuff look pretty, there is an endless amount of external stuff out there. There are tools, like you've got Google Slides. Shut up, my own voice. You've got video players, you've got slideshows, you've got all sorts of tools out there that can just be embedded through simple iframes, through embed codes that come with the tool. You've got content libraries like H5P, which I want to give a special shout out to because it's easily my favorite thing to pull in, with all sorts of interactive stuff. So this one, for example, flashcards. Let's have some flashcards in here, some interactive content. Just to give H5P an extra special shout out. Look at all these things that you can just do and embed in your courses. It's pretty great. Not sponsored by H5P, but really big fan of what they do. Very much recommend checking them out. If you have a paid account as well, you can integrate it through LTI, Learning Tools Interoperability, which is kind of a protocol to let us store grades and progress on those tools within OpenEdX. That's great. You can just hit me up if you want to use those, if you're an AppSembler customer. If you're not, work it out yourself. It's not hard. The last thing I'm going to talk about, I know I'm flying through these, is the value of template courses and staff-only areas. These are kind of tangentially related, so I squished them together into a single point, which is one of the reasons why we're 8 top tips instead of 10. You probably noticed that we lied a bit in cases, because we should switch it to 8 instead. First up, templates. As I previously mentioned with these HTML and CSS templates, you can put together templates of ways you want your content to appear. Let's say you want to have these signposts like the one I showed earlier. Let's say you've got particular layouts that you want to use. You can store your layouts in a subsection on your course and then copy them out when you want to use them. It's incredibly helpful to just, instead of the thing that people typically do is they do it once and then they'll copy it from the first time they did it onto the second, and then they'll copy it from the second time they did it onto the third, or go back to the first, rather than working from a central place to store those templates. And the way you keep those safe is you just go into advanced and hide from learners. This is incredibly helpful. Just having a place where people can play, people can work with stuff, people can store stuff. Let's say you've got some old content that you're not sure if you need it. Rather than deleting it, why not stick it in the staff-only sandbox area so that you've got it for later if you need it. Once you've got all those templates and stuff stored away, what you can also do is export the course itself as a template. So those who saw our last webinar probably saw that the first thing I do whenever I start a course is I go into my advanced settings, and I do things like hide it from the catalog, I disable, I don't know, anonymous discussions because I never want to have anonymous discussions. I enable a bunch of XBlocks that I think I'm going to use. I just do all this stuff. I might set up this staff only area. Once you're set up, before you do that, tools, export. That gives you a course file which has all of your common settings. What's the point in doing all that setup again and again and again and again if you're just doing the same thing every single time? There isn't one. So you just, when you create a new course, you import it, you bung your template course in, you're good to go. You don't have to do it again. That kind of gives you some consistency along with the templates that you can use. That gives you some consistency above throughout your courses and throughout the same course if you're just doing the same styling things every time. That's all I've got there. Are there any questions in the chat for me, Caesar?
We did get a question from Greg where he asks, can we access this course outline later, or is this just a demo? Some of the content would be useful to refer to interactively in the LMS.
What, this course right here?
Sounds like it.
I don't see any reason why we can't make that available. I can just export the course for you if you want.
Yeah, and we can follow up with you on that later, Greg. And also, I think we can also, yeah, we'll definitely share this with folks. This is pretty
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. Cool. So in that case, I'm going to stop sharing.
Fantastic.
And do you want to take it from there, Caesar?
I'm going to take it from here. And guys, we covered a lot of material. We're actually over time. Do you all see my screen? Yes?
Yep.
Fantastic. So here are the 8 items that we covered. Thank you so much, Cody and Matthew. We've got 4 minutes left. We want to be mindful of everybody's time. Does anybody else have any other questions? You've all been really, really interactive and had a lot of great questions during the chat. I mean, within the chat bar. Any questions that you'd like to raise now before we break? I'm gonna give you all a few seconds to type. And just a reminder for folks, yes, this is being recorded. And I love the idea that, Greg, you raised. Would love to share this course with folks so that you can just import into your own. It's very easy for us to export. We'll send it to you individually. I'm not seeing any new questions. Any final parting words or thoughts, Matthew and Cody, before we wrap up?
Parting words. Last sneaky tip, always get someone to read what you've done.
Very true. Yeah. I would double that.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, you've been really wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Keep an eye out in your inbox. We'll share those follow-up materials shortly, and also a recording of this webinar. Feel free to share it with your friends, your family, your loved ones. And
dogs, cats.
Dogs and cats. And here is a link if you'd like to learn more or get a live demo, especially if you're not already working with us. Go for it. You can reach us at appsembler.com/about/contact us. And we've actually got one more poll. If you have a second, please feel free to fill it out. And before you hop off. All right, lots of customers are already here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you all for filling out this poll.